There are no strings on me.
Hey, what is going on, everybody? It is your boy Carnage, your PrimitiveAK here, back with another video for you guys today. Today we are here with some of the best, most ideal, and most critical settings that you could possibly use and should be changing in Modern Warfare. And there are certainly a lot of settings that a lot of people don't know about, so I figured it'd be best if I cover some of the 8 most important settings that you should be changing, or at least taking a look at and making the decision on whether or not you should be changing them. But if you guys are new to the channel, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe. Really do appreciate you guys showing the love and support on the channel. Now, thankfully, you guys may notice the mic may sound a bit different actually, and that's because this whole weekend I've been at the G Fuel house happily streaming the 48-hour Carnage Twitch takeover over on the G Fuel channel. Thank you. I'd like to thank them, the fellows over at G Fuel, for allowing us to stay at the house. It's been quite an interesting weekend and an absolute blast as well, and they allowed us to use all of their setups and record videos as well. So big shout out to them as well. Make sure you guys check out their Twitch down below. But without further ado, let's get right into the video. Now, the first setting you're going to want to take a look at is your button layout preset. Now, if you guys remember, I did multiple settings videos where I talked about the button layout, and there are certainly quite a few different button layouts to work with. The most common one being tactical, followed by lefty and nomad Charlie, which is usually some things that people don't move. Stick and move is another great option, but I want to make something very clear here. These settings are very dependent on the type of controller that you play on. So in my specific case, I typically play with a scuff controller. I use a 4-paddle scuff impact, and all of my paddles are set to default with the 4 triangle, square, X, and circle. So if you are using a scuff impact or just a scuff controller in general, I strongly recommend that you leave the button layout on preset, because the paddles will pretty much take care of those extra buttons that are hard to reach in the first place. So definitely recommend leaving that where it is. You really won't see any benefit switching to something else like stick and move. Bumper jumper is another popular one. These are really only meant for people that have standard controllers, so I don't recommend using any of these 2 setups unless you are on those default controllers. Moving on, we're going to be talking about your sensitivity. This is another big topic that a lot of people have trouble trying to figure out. And the horizontal stick sensitivity, you're going to want to have this pretty much the same as vertical. Now, there is a pretty popular move where you actually turn down your horizontal stick sensitivity down 1 and your vertical is up 1, but I don't particularly notice any benefit out of using this, so I typically just leave them both at the same exact number. Now, I don't want to make something very clear here. The lower your sensitivity, the better it is. Now, I'm not saying crank this down all the way to 1, because obviously you're going to pretty much get trashed on almost every single game, but I recommend keeping this anywhere between 4 and 10. I don't recommend going any higher than that, just because things tend to get a little bit crazy. However, there are some very, very talented players that I play with, good friends of mine, such as Will, for example. He always plays on the max sensitivity. It's really just personal preference, but from my personal experience and from other friends as well, the lower your sensitivity, the more precise that your aim will be. But you'll just have to play around with this. I recommend starting low at around 5 and then work your way from there. See exactly what helps most to help you manage that perfect sensitivity to help you aim a little bit better. Moving on down the list, we now have your ADS sensitivity multiplier, low zoom. This one is actually pretty important. Now, I covered this back in Black Ops 3 and Black Ops 4, where you are able to tweak your ADS sensitivity. Now, this is basically the same thing as when you're not scoped in sensitivity, but when you are scoped in with a standard weapon like an M4, for example, with a default scope or a red dot sight or even iron sights, what this percentage number does is this is actually going to slow things down. So let's say right now I have a 6 sensitivity. For the sake of numbers, we're going to make this easier. Right now, let's say I have an 8 sensitivity, and then I decide to turn my multiplayer down to 75% or 0.75. This is what they're showing. What that's going to do is that's going to actually lower your stick sensitivity down to a 6. So when you're ADSing your gun, it's going to turn it down to a 6. That's basically what that means. Now, this is really, really helpful, because sometimes the higher sensitivity when you're ADSing may not be a good thing if you have that the same as your regular look sensitivity. So I recommend starting at 75%. A lot of people use 80% as well. 75 to 80 is kind of the sweet spot. Definitely tweak that around, but I strongly recommend to keep that as low as possible. Now, the next setting you're going to want to take a look at is your aim response curve. This is kind of an interesting setting that a lot of people haven't really touched. I'm sure most of you guys probably have this on standard for the most part, but what this is going to do, this is going to change the response time of your aim every time you scope in your gun. It's like aim assist to describe it in simpler terms, but it's going to change things up just a tad bit. Standard's going to be basically your average Call of Duty. Nothing changes from that. Pretty much every Call of Duty you've ever played is going to be standard. So if you're used to previous CODs, you'll know exactly how this feels. Now, what linear is going to do is this is going to change your aim stick where it maps directly to the aim rate. So it's going to make things a little bit more snappier than usual. I personally strongly recommend you put this on linear. Now we're going to talk about dynamic. Dynamic's going to be a little bit more, I guess you could put it, absurd in a way, where it reverses the S-curve mapping for fine aim rate control. This is kind of a little bit too strong in my opinion. I actually did use this and I noticed that my gun was snapping onto targets a little bit too much, to the point where it was actually starting to mess up my aim, and where I actually wanted to aim my target, it would drag it off of that because of the fact that I may be shooting at multiple targets in a small area, and the game has trouble deciding on which one to actually use. So I personally recommend you leave this on linear. It's going to help boost up that aim assist and response just a tad bit, but not too much where it gets in the way and actually ends up dragging off your target. Moving on, this one's kind of a no-brainer. I talk about this in every settings video I make, and that is disabling your controller vibration. Now, a lot of people think that this is a myth, where the vibration doesn't necessarily affect your aim, but believe it or not, it'll affect it by even the smallest millimeter. Even if you don't notice it, just turn it off. You don't need it. A lot of people say they need to feel their type of weapon or get a full grasp of how their weapon performs with the controller vibration. But I am telling you, based off of years upon years upon years of experience, that controller vibration does more harm than good. So do yourself a favor, turn it off. It doesn't help. Just leave it off. Moving on, we now have your slide behavior. This is another feature that kind of gets annoying, and I didn't realize that it was an actual feature until I looked at it recently, just a few days ago, when we started the 48-hour stream. What this is, the slide behavior. Now, if you guys remember in sliding, all you had to do was tap the circle button and you were able to slide, you know, a reasonable distance in the game. But for some reason, it's defaulted to where you have to actually hold the entire circle button to slide, and that can be very inconvenient. I'm very used to just tapping the button, so I strongly recommend you turn your slide behavior over to tap. So when you just press the circle button, it'll literally do the full slide animation, and you can actually cancel it if you like. If you want to jump, all you have to do is jump or press the jump button, and that'll cancel your slide if you need to shorten the slide to get out of cover or avoid a certain gunfight that you're trying to get yourself out of. So definitely put that to tap. You'll notice a significant, much better performance as well, because you don't have to sit there and holding the slide button. It can get really annoying sometimes. So definitely put that on tap as soon as you can. Moving on, we're now going to talk about motion blur. Now, this is basically a feature that games tend to put in their games, or developers tend to put in their games, where they want to make their game feel realistic. Now, obviously, when you look at something in real life and you're moving very fast, you're going to see what's known as motion blur. This is obviously a human thing, and then for some reason developers felt it was a good idea to put it in video games as well. God knows why, but I'm not sure. So world motion blur, this is basically going to blur your screen every time you're moving very fast or you're walking around, and you don't want this on, because this is basically just going to absolutely screw you over, and you may not see a target that's camping inside of a building because your game is intentionally blurring your entire video. So definitely turn your world motion blur off and disable your weapon motion blur as well. It'll blur your weapon. You don't want that to happen, so turn it all off. It is just a feature to make the game look more realistic. It is doing way more harm than good, so I strongly recommend that you guys just simply turn that off. And last but not least, guys, this one's kind of a no-brainer, but disable. A lot of people tend to, this is usually set by default, but a lot of people tend to not realize that they may accidentally turn this off, or you may have had the setting from the beta, because the game actually did keep settings from the beta, which actually, for some reason, for me at least, they actually transferred over to the full game. So I strongly recommend make sure your crossplay is set to enabled, or if you really don't want to play players from Xbox or PC or PS4, you can turn that off if you really want it to. But make sure this is enabled, because you may be wondering, well, why am I not able to find a lobby? check your crossplay, make sure that it's on. Anyways, guys, I hope this video certainly did help you guys out with some of the 8 best settings and the most critical settings that will change your game forever. It certainly helped me out, and I'm glad I was actually able to sit down and look at most of these settings. If it did help you out, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe. And if there's something that I did not mention in this video that helped you guys out as well, be sure to help your fellow COD gamers out. Post it in the comments box down below, and I'll be sure to try to pin one of the comments as well, or put a heart next to it so that way other people can see your comment. If you guys are new, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. It is your boy Carnage, or PrimitiveAK, signing out. Peace out, fellas.